It began with a simple tilt of the wrist, a minuscule miscalculation of space between the ceramic mug and the table's edge. But for Alex, it unfolded in the slow, catastrophic detail of a nightmare. The dark, steaming liquid surged over the rim, a scorching tide that bloomed instantly across the front of their crisp white shirt. The world in the bustling cafe did not stop, but for Alex, it narrowed to that single, spreading stain, a Rorschach test of pure humiliation. A hot wave of awareness washed over them, far more intense than the coffee's burn. Every clatter of a cup, every murmur of conversation, felt like a pointed comment. Alex was certain that all eyes had snapped toward the spectacle, that every patron was now watching, judging, and silently cataloguing this moment of profound clumsiness. Their mind replayed the spill on a torturous loop, the slight slip of their grip, the lazy arc of the liquid, the final, damning splash. They saw it from every imagined angle in the room, each version more exaggerated and graceless than the last. The friendly chatter around them morphed into a chorus of stifled laughter. A man glancing at his watch became a person sneering at the mess. A woman adjusting her scarf was clearly hiding a smirk. The evidence of their own inadequacy was now emblazoned on their chest for the entire world to see. Frantic, Alex grabbed a wad of napkins, dabbing at the fabric with a useless, jerky motion that only seemed to make the stain larger and more obvious. The urge to flee was a physical pressure in their chest. Muttering a half-formed apology to the empty air, they shoved their laptop into their bag, not even bothering to close it properly. They kept their gaze locked on the floor, a prisoner avoiding the eyes of their executioners, and made a beeline for the door. The short walk to the exit felt like a mile-long gauntlet, their skin prickling with the heat of 1,000 imagined stares. Once outside, the crisp air did nothing to cool the simmering embarrassment. They spent the rest of the day cloaked in the memory of the spill, the damp, brown patch on their shirt, a phantom weight they could not shed. On the subway, in the elevator, walking to their apartment, they were convinced every passerby could see the ghost of the incident, that their momentary lapse was a permanent part of their identity. The world felt like an unforgiving audience, and Alex was its most self-conscious performer, trapped in a solitary play where the only critic was the loud, unrelenting voice in their own head. The phantom stain of the coffee spill still felt visible to Alex days later, a psychic brand that colored every interaction with a tinge of anticipated judgment. It was this lingering unease that propelled them to a quiet corner table in a different cafe, across from Maya, whose calm presence had always felt like a shelter from life's minor storms. Alex fidgeted with their sleeve, the story of the spilled coffee and the subsequent day of imagined scrutiny tumbling out in a rushed, self-deprecating monologue. They expected reassurance, a simple "don't worry about it." But Maya listened with the quiet intensity of someone assembling a puzzle. When Alex finished, Maya leaned forward, her eyes holding a spark of gentle revelation. She spoke not of simple embarrassment, but of a cognitive trap, a trick of the mind she called the spotlight effect. She described it as an internal projector, one that each person carries, constantly casting a brilliant, unforgiving beam upon themselves. We stand center stage in our own lives, she explained, and we mistakenly assume the entire audience is as focused on our performance as we are. To illustrate, she recounted a fascinating experiment. Researchers had asked students to wear an embarrassingly loud t-shirt emblazoned with a garish pop star's face into a room full of their peers. Afterward, the shirt wearers were asked to estimate how many people had noticed their fashion faux pas. Their estimates were wildly inflated, steeped in the acute self-consciousness of the moment. They felt exposed, scrutinized. The truth, however, was starkly different. When the other students in the room were polled, only a mere 20% had actually registered the shirt. The spotlight in the wearer's mind was so blinding, it had completely obscured the fact that most of the audience was preoccupied with their own internal monologues, their own invisible spotlights. As Maya laid out the facts, Alex felt a strange internal shift, a series of mental dominoes beginning to fall. The memory of the coffee spill replayed, but this time, the imagined audience was no longer a unified, mocking entity. The man with the watch was probably late for a meeting. The woman with the scarf was likely fretting over her own chapped lips or a difficult work email. They weren't critics. They were fellow actors in their own private plays, too busy with their own scripts to properly notice his. The crushing weight of universal scrutiny began to feel less like a fact and more like a fabrication, a story his anxious brain had written and then convinced him was true. It wasn't that people were cruel or hyper-observant. They were simply, beautifully, and universally self-absorbed. The relief that washed over Alex was not the gentle warmth of comfort, but the profound, staggering coolness of a fundamental truth finally understood. The familiar scent of roasted beans and steamed milk greeted Alex like a forgotten challenge as they pushed open the cafe door, the little brass bell above it jingling not as an alarm, but as a simple announcement of their arrival. Their footsteps were steady on the worn floorboards that led to the same table, the one by the window where the sunlight had so unforgivingly illuminated the coffee-stained days before. Alex's gaze swept the room, not in a frantic search for judgment, but with a new, quiet curiosity. The same cast of characters was present, the student with textbooks splayed like a paper fan, the couple murmuring over shared pastries, the man typing furiously on his laptop. Yet the scene was entirely different. No heads turned. No eyes flickered toward them with recognition or ridicule. The world of the cafe hummed along its own intricate, self-involved rhythm, utterly indifferent to Alex's return. They approached the counter where the same barista from that day was polishing the espresso machine's chrome fixtures with a soft cloth. Alex waited, their posture relaxed, their hands loose at their sides. When the barista finally looked up, his expression was one of polite, generic readiness. There was no flicker of memory in his eyes, no trace of the shared history Alex had constructed in their mind. He saw only another customer. Alex placed their order, their voice clear and even, and as the barista turned to work the machine, they watched him. They saw the slight furrow in his brow as he focused on tamping the grounds, the way his eyes darted to the queue beginning to form behind them, the faint, preoccupied smile he offered to no one in particular. He was not thinking about a spilled coffee from days ago. He was thinking about the milk frothing correctly, his lunch break, or a text message waiting on his phone. The profound simplicity of the moment settled over Alex, a quiet epiphany more powerful than any theoretical explanation. Meyer's words about the spotlight effect were no longer an abstract concept, but a tangible reality playing out in real time. Every person in the bustling room was the star of their own complex narrative, each mentally composing a grocery list, rehearsing a difficult conversation, or yearning for a vacation. They were all living inside the vivid, all-consuming theater of their own minds, leaving very little attention to spare for the minor stumbles of the supporting cast. The liberation that followed this realization was a physical sensation, a loosening of a knot in their chest they had carried for years. The anxieties that had once felt like permanent fixtures, the fear of a mispronounced word, a clumsy gesture, a visible stain, now seemed like phantoms, shadows cast by a light they themselves controlled. Leaving the cafe with a fresh, securely lidded cup in hand, Alex stepped out into the afternoon sun and made a silent, firm resolution. They would grant themselves the same grace they now understood everyone else was already taking. They would worry less about the imaginary audience and focus more on the quiet, unobserved act of living. The city street was no longer a gauntlet of potential critics, but a river of individuals, each navigating their own current, each blissfully unaware of the small, human dramas unfolding in the person walking next to them. Alex walked on, their stride confident and unburdened, feeling not invisible, but finally, peacefully part of